Some families set the table for love. Mine set out a paper plate and called it tradition. My name is Alara Quinn. I'm 30, and I make my living as a systems analyst, the one people call when a mess needs order. I used to believe that if I kept the lights on and the budget balanced, I'd earn a seat inside the glow. That illusion ended the night my brother got married under a white tent that I had quietly bankrolled. The lawn behind the venue had the kind of charm planners sell to the hopeful. Eucalyptus threaded along beams, fairy lights strung like promises, a long table staged for photographs. Chicago air in October has a way of cutting straight through satin and sentiment, and I felt it knifing through my dress as I stepped out of the shadows and into their scene. Music drifted from the tent, warm as butter. On a clipboard somewhere, a coordinator had likely checked my deposit off as secured. That word used to comfort me. Ethan, my brother, found me at the edge of the light. He didn't look embarrassed, he looked efficient, the way he does when he's moving furniture for a photograph. "You're not in the wedding party," he said, handing me a paper plate like he was issuing a pass for the lawn. Derek, one of his new best men, smirked. "Real family eats under roofs." The plate trembled in my hand, not from the wind, but from the small, clear truth of it. Inside, champagne flutes rang like thin bells. I could practically hear my money singing in crystal. A bridesmaid floated past, all chiffon and curated laughter. I walked to the gift table, set under its own halo of lights. I slipped an envelope from my clutch and fed it into the box with the decorum of someone who still believes gestures matter. Then I stood there a long heartbeat, watching the tent breathe, counting the ways I had made this night possible. I reached into the box and took the envelope back. A gasp rose behind me as if I'd upended a hive. I opened the card, slid the check out, and folded it until the paper clicked against itself. In halves, in quarters, in eighths, the sound of a small, decisive weather change. "Financial ghosts don't bring gifts," I said, and let the confetti fall into a linen-draped trash bin. I set the plate on a cocktail table, centered it, and left the glow behind me without rushing. Before I tell you what came of that choice, tell me where you're watching from, drop it in the comments, because the next part starts when the lights finally meet the ledger. I drove home through a city that looked staged from the windshield, windows glowing, trains ribboning past like moving garlands. In my apartment, the air smelled like lemon oil and clean laundry. I kicked off my heels, set my clutch on the counter, and opened my laptop. The screen lit my hands like a small, cold stage. Venmo came first. The shared pool, bride and groom emojis, vague labels like backup, gift, vendor, still sat there, linked to my account, showing $6,200. My thumb hovered, then moved. Transfer out, zero the balance, remove my card, block the attached numbers. A neat process, like turning off a faucet. I scrolled back through months of requests, each packaged as a favor that sounded reasonable alone. Caterer deposit, $3,200. Dad's suit, $200, so he would feel confident in photos. Drone upgrade, $1,800, because we only get this day once. Each line wore little thank you notes, the kind people send when they assume you will say yes. Got you, you're a lifesaver, couldn't do this without you. None of it had felt like theft at the time. It felt like being useful. I clicked open a folder where I keep wedding planning materials I never asked to keep. There was the Google sheet I had set up months ago, color-coded, tidy. When the tabs loaded, I saw the ones I knew. Timeline, vendors, seating. A few more had joined since I last looked. I tapped into one called Preferences, nothing there. Another called Optics, password protected, then not. Someone had removed the lock and forgotten I existed. Excluded Guests was the fourth tab. It looked like a punchline typed by a careful hand. Column A, name. Column B, notes. B12, Alara Quinn, doesn't match vibe. Keep outside main tent, provide plate. The words didn't shout, they held their breath. I stood up, pressed my palms into the counter until the laminate pattern came up in my skin, then sat back down because there was more. A diagram sat on the layout tab, tables like little pearls, arrows pointing to a shaded rectangle labeled tent. A dotted path snaked from lawn entrance to a small box marked overflow. Next to it, a note: escort to lawn area, no tent access, provide plate. They had written the choreography for my invisibility. My phone buzzed, a notification from Facebook. Sloan had tagged me. I clicked. A long oak table from the engagement brunch, candle glow, curated laughter. Her caption read, "Surrounded by those who matter most, our core." I flipped through the album. I wasn't in any of it. In the comments, an old neighbor asked if there wasn't another sibling. Sloan replied, "Some support quietly, some don't support at all." 19 likes stacked beneath a sentence that turned my absence into a virtue. I opened an old set of credentials, remote access from the time I rebuilt Ethan's laptop after a spill, intending only to clear my name from an auto login. The connection still worked. Folders opened like doors. Wedding 18, BTSR photos, vendor threads, group chats with names meant to sound harmless, tent talk, final look. I dragged copies into a new directory on my machine, my breath steady because steadiness was the only thing I could control. In tent talk, someone had written, "Love him, but off-brand energy." Another line, "Sad aunt vibe." A bridesmaid suggested I could help cut the cake since I had paid for half. Sloan typed, "No, sticky hands and photos." Ethan wrote, "Keep logistics tight." That was my name in his voice. Logistics, not sister. I stopped when the clock on my microwave read 12:41. My living room floor had become a neat grid of paper and pixels, transfers, screenshots, diagrams, captions. I wrote a single line in a notebook I keep for hard truths. Financial ghosts don't bring gifts. The ink bled a little, through to the next page, and I closed the cover. Outside, the city kept glowing for other people's pictures. Inside, I turned off the lights and let the screen go dark. Morning would come with or without me, so I chose to meet it ready. I cleared the coffee table and laid everything out like a blueprint. Transfers with dates, screenshots with timestamps, the Google Sheet tabs printed in black and white so no one could pretend the colors confused them. I made stacks with neat binder clips, Venmo, vendors, chats, layout. Each stack got a sticky note with a number. Order matters when people try to talk over you. I picked up the phone and called a name I'd saved for emergencies I hoped I'd never have. Caleb Morton, attorney. We'd met through a client who once told me he was the rare sort who read every clause. He answered on the second ring, voice calm, awake. I told him the facts in a straight line. Funds moved under my name, a pattern of requests that added up, a spreadsheet that wrote me out of the room, and a loan I suspected was not mine. "Can you back what you're saying?" he asked. "I can back every sentence," I said. "Then we keep your hands clean and your edges sharp," he said. "Revoke any authorization tied to you, serve notices in writing, no scenes, no shouting. You'll need copies for planners and vendors and a formal severance of any joint access. If there's fraud on a loan, we'll open that file, but not tonight. Tonight is about control." He dictated the language. I typed it exactly. Revocation, termination, cease authorization on contracts entered using my name, credit, or power of attorney. I printed 3 full sets and a short cover letter in plain talk anyone could understand. He would email me his signed notice within the hour. "Alara," he said before we hung up, "do not touch anything that isn't yours. Do not raise your voice. Paper, not volume." After the call, I made a list on a clean page. Pull pending transfers, download receipts, backup chats, print diagrams, prepare envelopes, witness, boxes. I checked off what I'd already done and moved to what was left. In the back of my closet, I kept a roll of white paper and a spool of silver ribbon from holidays that never lived up to the photos. I wrapped 3 small boxes I'd saved from a move, one labeled Ethan, one labeled Gregory and Marianne, one labeled Head Table. Inside each, I placed curated copies, the excluded guests tab, the layout with the dotted path to overflow, the group chat lines where I was a brand risk and a sad aunt, the payment timeline, and Caleb's notice on top. Not gifts, mirrors. My voicemail icon blinked. Julian's voice, steady and warm, filled the room. I'm at the corner store with 2 ridiculous pints of ice cream. You don't have to be brave alone. Text me a time and I'm there. I listened twice. I didn't press call back. There are nights when love is company and nights when love is room. I set my phone on Do Not Disturb and opened the loan portal my father once showed me when he wanted me to admire his discipline. I searched for my name. The screen returned nothing I could move on yet, but the absence felt less like safety and more like fog. Caleb would help me clear it tomorrow. I closed the tab. By 11, the apartment was quiet except for the printer. I signed each cover letter with a pen that didn't skip, then slid papers into thick envelopes. I tucked a spare flash drive into my pocket, a second into the lining of my tote. Systems analysts are paid to imagine failure points. I made backups for my backups. Just before midnight, I took a shower hot enough to erase the night from my skin, then dressed in a black suit with deep pockets and a jacket that sat right on the shoulders. In the mirror, I didn't look fierce. I looked finished. I pressed my palms flat on the sink and said what I needed to hear. This isn't sabotage, it's clarity. I placed the 3 white boxes on the table beside the tote, set my keys on top, and turned off every light in the apartment. The room fell into a clean, chosen dark. I lay down without checking my phone, and for the first time in a long time, sleep came like a closing door. Morning could find me ready. Dawn came clear and indifferent. I dressed, slid the envelopes and flash drive into my tote, and carried the 3 white boxes to the door. The city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes as I drove, delivery trucks idling, a jogger crossing on a stale yellow. At the venue, the field shone with wet grass and rented romance. The white tent rose ahead of me like a promise written in capital letters. I parked near the service lane and stepped out with the tote on my shoulder, the boxes balanced in my arms. A woman with a headset and a clipboard intercepted me at the edge of the gravel. "Hi, I'm Brianna Holt, planner. Can I help you?" "You can," I said. "I'm the financial contact for contracts tied to my name. We need to make some corrections." She blinked, polite but wary. I set the boxes down on a cocktail table, opened the tote, and handed her a folder thick enough to be heavy. "Revocation and termination notices," I said. "For any agreement entered using my name, credit, or authority. Effective this morning. Each vendor has a copy. You'll want to review the signatures and timestamps." Brianna flipped to the first page, then the second. Her lips parted a fraction. Let me call my office." "Of course," I said. "I'll wait." She moved aside and spoke into her headset, then into her phone, then back into the headset. The calm on her face began to slip. A man pushing a rolling rack of glassware slowed to a stop near the tent entrance, watching her expression the way people watch a weather report. A black pickup with vinyl lettering, DJ Services, rumbled past me toward the vendor lot, then paused. The driver's phone lit up on the dash. He answered, listened, checked a number against the name on my documents when I offered the page, and nodded once. He swung the wheel, the truck eased into a turn, and the tail lights drifted back down the gravel lane. On the other side, 2 lighting technicians stood under the eaves and scrolled through emails. One of them looked up at Brianna, who lifted her clipboard, then looked at me. I kept my hands at my sides. The techs conferred, pulled the last cables from the power strip, and coiled them with the matter-of-fact care of people who do this every weekend. The fairy lights dimmed to a weak amber, then steadied, then flickered in a pattern that said the story had changed. One by one, they went dark. The caterer's van door rolled open with a clean metallic slide. Trays that had been destined for the head table were lifted and set back into insulated boxes. A woman in a white jacket spoke to Brianna, who pointed to the paperwork. The woman read, sighed softly, and began directing her crew with small, precise gestures. Steam drifted from a chafing pan and disappeared in the cold air. I checked my watch without hurrying the moment. 10:37 a.m. Brianna returned, the clipboard now pressed to her chest. "Ms. Quinn," she said quietly, "payment authorizations that list your name have been revoked." "That's correct," I said. "The lighting team says they cannot proceed. The DJ is leaving. The caterer is pausing service." "That's also correct," I said. She swallowed, then squared her shoulders, a professional finding her footing. "We'll stand down on any line item tied to these notices until we receive new authorization." "Thank you," I said. "Please provide receipts for any cancellations. I'll sign for receipt only." A low hum faded at the tent's rear as the generator sputtered and cut. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind that lets you hear shoes on gravel and ribbons snapping in the breeze. Without the background thrum, the white canvas seemed thinner, a rib cage minus its heartbeat. A florist working the arch paused with wire in her hand and watched a eucalyptus strand relax. As if the plant itself were relieved the performance had ended early. A delivery driver stepped from a van carrying a pale, tiered cake. His phone buzzed in his apron pocket. He checked it, looked from the tent to Brianna to me, and waited for a nod that did not come. He turned back to the van and set the cake carefully on a shelf that locked into place. I gathered the folder from Brianna, placed it back in my tote, and lifted the 3 white boxes. The air smelled like cold grass and frosting. I set the boxes on a side table near the entrance where no one could claim they hadn't seen them. "Let's begin," I said, not to anyone in particular, and stood still long enough to feel the shift as the day accepted a new script. I didn't have to wait long. Word travels faster than music. From the far side of the lawn, Ethan spotted the dim tent and came at me in a hard march, tux jacket half on, tie loose. "What did you do?" he said, voice already breaking. "I secured my assets," I said. "You can't just— This is my wedding." "It was never my wedding," I said evenly. "It was my sponsorship." His jaw worked. He reached a hand toward the white boxes as if he could move the moment by moving cardboard. I shifted them out of reach. "Don't," I said quietly. "Open them at the head table." Guests were arriving in clusters now, heels biting into gravel, faces tipped toward the powerless tent. The photographer lifted a camera and lowered it again, unsure what story to tell. Brianna hovered with her clipboard, eyes on me, then on the paperwork in her hands. Behind Ethan, I saw my parents crossing the grass, my mother in a pale dress, my father with his shoulders pulled high like armor. Caleb appeared at my side with a slim black briefcase. He gave me a small nod and opened it, drawing out 3 sealed envelopes and a sheaf of papers. His voice carried without a shout. "As of this morning," he said, "all joint financial access involving Ms. Alara Quinn and the following parties, Mr. Ethan Quinn, Mr. Gregory Quinn, and Mrs. Marianne Quinn, has been legally severed. Power of attorney is revoked. Any and all authorizations to use Ms. Quinn's name or credit for contracts related to this event are terminated." A murmur moved through the cluster, the kind that makes people step closer and hold their breath. Gregory's face went white. "Not here," he said low. "Ilara, not here." "Here's where you used me," I said. "Here is fine." Caleb flipped to the next page. "Notices have been delivered to the planner and to each vendor on file. Any attempt to continue work under Ms. Quinn's authorization constitutes a breach." He held out the duplicates. Brianna took them with both hands. My father stepped forward, chest first. "You don't understand what you're doing." Julian moved in without drama, placing himself between us. Back up, sir, he said, quiet but firm. Gregory looked him up and down. Who are you? The man who's tired of watching her pay for your pride, Julian said. I took out my phone and scrolled to a file I had labeled with a single word. One more thing. I tapped play. My father's voice cut the air cleanly, unmistakable even through a phone speaker. If you're not part of the solution, you don't get to be in the photos. The sound stilled the lawn. Even the florist froze, wire mid-twist. My mother's mouth parted, then closed. Ethan looked anywhere but at me. Sloane had appeared near the entrance, bridesmaids clustering around her like petals around a center that had lost its light. I set the 3 white boxes on the head table, one by one, and spoke to no one in particular. Since I wasn't invited, I said, I brought something meaningful. Ethan lunged for the nearest lid. Caleb's hand landed on the box first. At the altar, he said, for clarity. Ethan's hand hovered, then fell. I turned the top box so the label faced the aisle, Ethan. The second, Gregory and Marianne. The third, head table. Inside each, the same truth arranged in neat piles. The excluded guests tab that wrote me out, the tent layout with its dotted path to overflow and the note provide plate, chat printouts where I was off-brand energy and a sad aunt, the payment timeline with sums and dates, and on top, Caleb's notice, signed and time-stamped. My mother took a step closer. Elara, sweetheart, she said, voice trembling. Please, not today. I met her eyes. You had all the other days. Someone whispered, oh my God. Another, is that legal? A guest lifted her phone to record. I didn't tell her to stop. Optics thrives on shadows. Facts prefer daylight. Gregory tried again. You're embarrassing the family. Maybe embarrassment builds character, I said. For a second, no one moved. Then the day did what days do when the script changes. It adjusted. The DJ's truck faded down the lane. A lighting tech rolled a final coil and set it on a cart. The generator remained silent. Without its hum, voices sounded truer. I lifted my tote, pressed the folder back inside, and looked at Ethan one last time. You can keep the tent, I said. I'm done paying for the weather. I turned and walked toward the gravel, the weight of the boxes left behind like anchors cut clean. Behind me, the crowd began to talk in fast, overlapping threads. In front of me, the lane held steady under my shoes. I didn't hurry, I didn't run, I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, the whispers behind me had hardened into stories. That's how news works. It chooses a spine and adds ribs. Before I pulled onto the road, my phone started pulsing. Unknown numbers, cousins, a coworker who hadn't texted me in 3 years. I turned the screen face down and drove through a city that suddenly seemed too bright. At home, I put the tote on the table and washed my hands like I was closing a long shift. The quiet held. Then the internet found me. A neighborhood blog pushed a headline before sunset. Sister pulls plug on wedding finances. By nightfall, the story had jumped to a local site that likes family drama wrapped in etiquette. Photos cropped tight on the dark tent, comments stacked like driftwood. I didn't answer anyone. I made coffee, even though it was too late, and set up my camera on the kitchen table. No makeup. No staging. Just a lamp angled so my face wasn't a rumor. I opened the laptop and lined up what mattered. Transfers, the Google Sheet tabs, the printouts from the group chats, a copy of Caleb's notice. I pressed record and spoke for 12 minutes. I didn't explain feelings. I read facts, dates, amounts, labeled screenshots. I ended with a sentence I had already written to myself. They erased me from the picture, so I took back what they bought with my name. I uploaded the video and turned the laptop away. It gathered speed on its own. By midnight, 10,000 views. By morning, 400,000. The comments came in waves, some mean, some stunned, many from people who had been nicknamed loyal while their accounts were emptied. I recognized the shape of their stories. Invisible is a habit families teach you. An email landed from a small financial advocacy group I'd never heard of. They offered help building a resource page for people like me, people whose family turned love into leverage. "We'll sponsor the platform if you're interested," the director wrote. I was. I registered a name that made sense on the tongue. Unplug the tent. Within a week, the skeleton stood. Forums, a page to list pro bono attorneys, a column of simple checklists for anyone who needed steps when their hands shook. Volunteers appeared because that's what happens when you name a thing out loud. While Unplug the Tent took its first breaths, the audit Caleb initiated moved in a straight line. He called me on a Tuesday, the kind of clear Chicago afternoon that used to make me want to walk the lake. "We have it," he said. "Your father filed a small business loan 2 years ago. He used your information as co-signer. Digital consent was forged with a copy of your signature from a lease you signed at 23. The bank has cleared you of liability." He paused to let that settle. "His license is suspended pending further action. Accounts linked to the loan are frozen." I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at a thread on the duvet. "And my mother?" "Cooperating," he said. "Statements given. It will help." After we hung up, the apartment was very quiet. Not the brittle quiet before a storm, just the kind you notice when a machine turns off after running too long. I checked the site. Unplug the Tent had 1,200 members and a moderator offering to translate documents for people who needed them. Someone had posted a list of questions to ask before agreeing to be a co-signer. Someone else wrote, "I thought I was ungrateful. Turns out I was underwriting." I kept my phone on Do Not Disturb. When a number I knew by heart popped up on the lock screen, I let it pass and didn't listen to the voicemail. I slept in snatches. I woke at 3, made tea, and answered 2 messages on the forum under a plain username. By the end of the week, the video had crossed 2 million views, the site had 5,000 members, and I could walk from the kitchen to the window without thinking about the tent. At night, I practiced a kind of silence I chose. No clapping back, no interviews. I let the noise do what noise does: rise, crest, thin. In the spaces it left, I stacked papers in tidy folders and slid them into a drawer. I stood by the sink and watched the city lights blink, then blink out. When the apartment went still, it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. The call came on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain. My mother's name filled the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered because some habits are slow to die. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. "Alara," she said, "your father collapsed this morning. Mercy General. He's asking for you." I looked out the window at the slick street, watched a bus throw light across a puddle. "Is he conscious?" "Yes," she said quickly. "He keeps saying your name. Please, honey, just come." There was a time I would have grabbed my keys without a coat. I told her I would call her back and hung up. I set the phone on the counter and chose not to move. The tea kettle clicked off. I poured a cup and stood there letting the steam fog my glasses. Then I turned the phone face down and left it that way. By noon, the internet had decided I needed a story with a bow. A post began to spread, a photo of my parents, my brother, and me in front of the old house. The caption read, "Reconciliation is possible. Blood always wins." It came from Ava Morales, who used to date Julian and now worked in PR. She had tagged Unplug the Tent, as if my boundary were a campaign. Julian arrived an hour later, rain on his shoulder seams. He saw the post open on my laptop and went still. "She called me last week," he said, voice low. "Said she wanted to help you reshape the narrative. I told her it wasn't her story to pitch. I didn't think she'd do this." "She thinks I'm an image now," I said. "She thinks everything is," he said, and rubbed the back of his neck the way he does when he's angry at himself. I logged into the platform and wrote what I meant, no more and no less. "Forgiveness isn't a photo op. Healing isn't PR, blood is leverage, and leverage isn't love. I posted it and closed the tab. The shares climbed. Ava's firm issued a tidy statement about intentions. I didn't reply. I took the kettle off the stove before it screamed. That afternoon, Caleb called with the finality people think they want until they get it. The civil case is closed, he said. The fraud is confirmed. Your father's license is suspended. Asset actions proceed from here. Thank you, I said. The word felt heavy and correct. After we hung up, an email slid into my inbox from my mother. The subject line was my name. The body was short. We didn't know how deep it went. Please remember, we're still family. I thought of all the ways that sentence had been used to pry open my wallet and my patience. I typed one line and pressed send. Family survives on accountability, not apologies. Then I archived the thread and set a rule so I wouldn't see it again by accident. Night came early. I walked the length of the apartment in my socks, checked the doors, watered the plant that refuses to die on the windowsill. Julian sat at the table with his hands around a mug. You don't have to narrate this for anyone, he said. I know, I said. You don't have to go to the hospital. I know that too. He nodded and stayed. The city settled outside like a big animal exhaling. Somewhere a siren rose and fell. I stacked the day's papers into a neat pile, slid a binder clip across them, and put them away. The screen lit up now and then with a new comment, a new request, a new opinion. I let it glow without me. Boundaries, I'd learned, aren't walls you build for other people. They're doors you keep the key to. I packed in a single afternoon, documents in a flat folder, a week of clothes, the kettle, the notebook with the sentences that saved me. I left the keys with the landlord and pointed the car east. The highway unspooled under a sky that couldn't be bothered with my story. A small town on the Maine coast took me in without questions. The apartment had peeling blue shutters and a balcony just big enough for one chair and a mug. On the first morning, the ocean sounded like a machine that never breaks. I made coffee, wrapped my hands around the heat, and watched fishermen cast nets in a practiced arc. When my phone rattled against the counter, I flipped it face down and let it run out of nerve. Unplug the tent no longer needed me to be a headline. I handed the day-to-day to a team of lawyers and counselors who spoke in steps, not slogans. I logged in once under a plain username to post a checklist for people newly awake to their accounts. Freeze, document, revoke, record. Then I logged out. The days slipped into a simple pattern. Walk the shoreline before 9, write for an hour, answer 2 messages on the forum when the house was quiet. In the evenings, I sat on the balcony and let the Atlantic keep time. The shock wore off the way a bruise does, first tender, then something you forget until you press it. When the internet moved on to a fresher outrage, I didn't chase it. I let my name become just a name again. A letter arrived from a woman I didn't know, forwarded through the site. Your story didn't save me, she wrote. It reminded me I could save myself. I folded the paper along the crease and slid it into my notebook beside the line that started all of this. Financial ghosts don't bring gifts. It read like a warning and a promise both. One windy afternoon, I pushed open the cafe door by the docks and ordered a latte that came in a mug too heavy to be precious. I took a table near the window and wrote a sentence I hoped to believe. There's life after leverage. The waitress asked if I lived around here. Sort of, I said, still figuring out where I belong. She smiled like it wasn't complicated. You'll know when you stop explaining it. He found me 3 weeks later. I heard Julian's voice before I saw him, steady in the doorway. You pick the coldest beaches, he said, and set his bag by the chair. We walked the pier without filling it with talk. When the wind got sharp, he reached into his coat and handed me an envelope. Inside was a photo of us at a street fair, months before the wedding, laughing, not curated, not useful to anyone's optics. A picture that doesn't cost you anything, he said. Back at the apartment, the phone trembled along the counter. Old numbers, unknown numbers, people who wanted an ending they could repost. I let it buzz. I poured coffee and watched the water throw silver at the sky. The quiet didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt occupied. They used to own my reactions, I said, more to the window than to him. Now they don't even get my silence. The horizon held steady. I closed my notebook on the fresh page and left it there. A door I could open when I wanted, not when I was called. Peace, I'd learned, isn't a prize they give you at the end. It's permission. And I finally gave it to myself.